Okay, Mary Jo.
Okay, well, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Denice Adkins is a professor at the School of Information Science and Learning Technologies at the iSchool, the University of Missouri. She has been a Fulbright Scholar to Honduras and a Fulbright Specialist to India. Dr. Adkins is the president and treasurer of Reforma, the National Association to promote library and information services to Latinos and the Spanish-speaking. She is the secretary treasurer and membership director of the Association for Library and Information Science Education and counselor at large for the American Library Association. Dr. Adkins's research includes public and school libraries, services to the Latinx community, service in rural areas, and service to diverse populations. She has been the recipient of many, many awards, including the David Cohen Emert Multicultural Award, the Outstanding Research Paper Award, and an Outstanding Library Advocacy Award, among others, in 2020 alone. And although we wish she could visit in person to Buffalo, she did visit Buffalo back in 2000 as a visiting assistant professor. So it is my honor to present Dr. Denice Adkins.
All right, thank you. So I am here to talk about this. I should also mention that in the introduction, most of those things that Mary Jo just mentioned, I did them in the past. I am not currently doing them, or else I would be even more tired than I am now. So I'm going to tell you about this little project, Rural School Libraries Anchoring Community Mental Health Literacy. Now, I've got to tell you, since Dr. Julian invited me and said, hey, would you talk about this article? And since I already had a slide deck made up to talk about this article, I am using that. You can see who my colleagues were. Dr. Beth Brendler works here with me at the University of Missouri in our iSchool. Melissa Morris, she's done a lot of things, but she was, at the time that we started this research, the head of our, I forget the name, but it was our endowed professorship position, or our endowed center for school child mental health support. And Carrie Townsend is our doctoral student, but she is also the coordinator of Columbia Public Schools. So she oversees Columbia Public School libraries. She oversees, I think, about 40 schools, elementary, middle, and secondary, and their library collections and their librarians. So that's the clean story, though, and then we all did this. But here's the origin story of this. Melissa Morris came to me because she had a school counselor who said, you know, I drive in a long way to this really rural school. I'd love to be able to listen to an audiobook or maybe read an ebook related to counseling so that I can help better counsel my students. So Melissa had this great idea to create a circulating collection of audiobooks and ebooks housed at MU that we could check out to people who were, to school counselors across the state, and then they would send them back, and we would just keep doing this. And at that point, I said, Melissa, I wonder if you've heard of Overdrive. Many of the books that you are looking for or that you are recommending are already available on Overdrive, and the state library makes subscription available for most rural libraries in the state. Plus, of course, some of our counselors were driving in from St. Louis, which has much bigger system, a much bigger collection than we do here in Columbia. And Columbia has a better collection, I think, than some of our rural areas do. So that was kind of the startup, the origin of this project. And it led to the question, and these are not pretty questions, and I did not communicate them to Melissa, but it led to the questions of, cheese and crackers, why aren't counselors and school librarians working on these? This is clearly a question in the LIS domain, And it's clearly something that school librarians already know how to provide. And then, of course, the more public question that I shared with Melissa is, wow, I'd really like to know more about what school librarians could do to support counselors, teachers, and children in their own buildings. So that is how this project came to be. Another element is Melissa, because she wasn't faculty, is like, I want to do a good thing for the community, and I am faculty, so like, I need grant money. So to combine these two interests, we wrote an IMLS grant. And in order to write the grant, we had to demonstrate need, which is unfortunately pretty easy to do because our children in rural areas are not in a good position. 1 in 5 children has serious mental illness, suicide, second leading cause of teen death. Actually, this slide is old, so it might be the leading cause, I don't know. And more people die by suicide in rural areas than in urban areas because rural communities lack mental health care. And when rural communities do have mental health care, it's their schools that are serving as the children's mental health system. And that's de facto. It's not actually that schools intend to go in and say, we're going to be the mental health system. It's just that there's no one else. So this all, obviously, it was tremendously easy to make this case, unfortunately, that, hey, rural school libraries can at least do something. And so that led us, we got the grant. It was exciting. That meant we had to do the research. So we started out with our main question. How can school librarians serve as community anchors to support mental health and wellness? That's an awkward question because it had to get in all of the IMLS buzzwords of the grant year that we were trying to write for. But that was our question. We looked in the literature. There were no best practices for how school librarians should engage with state agencies, with local education agencies, which is what the rest of us know as schools, and what we could be doing to improve children's mental health. But we thought, there are these connections here. We can make this work. Because in rural libraries, public libraries, school libraries, and schools are like community anchor institutions where everyone goes. And we already knew, because of the good work of Bill Lukenbill and Barbara Imroth a long time ago, that school librarians already make health information available. So they could make mental health information available too. Okay, so there was a lot of research stickiness because of various reasons. I'll get into them later, but our first foray into this area, and this is what we actually talk about in the article that I was asked to present on, so that's what you're going to hear about, were focus groups with school librarians, asking them kind of like, well, what do you provide? What could you provide? How do you feel comfortable providing anything? We member checked with participants during focus groups. So it sounds like you're saying X, Y, Z. And they would say, yes, I'm saying X and Y, but not exactly Z. I mean something different from Z. We analyzed all the transcripts separately. 3 members of the research team did. So it was Beth, myself, and Carrie analyzed the transcripts. And then we checked the code. We checked each other's codes to see, like, are we agreeing? Are we not agreeing? And we worked out, like, okay, you called this topic X, I called it topic Y. What do we mean by these things? So that is the quick and dirty summary of the methods. Now, invariably, when I'm at a research talk, I'm all like, oh, tell me more about the methods. But most people actually want the finding and discussions because that's where the interesting part is. So we found 4 broad overarching themes: resources, challenges, desires, and good examples. So resources, this is like, of the resources you can provide, what can you actually do? What can you accomplish? So we also had sub-themes, and our sub-theme in resources is that nonfiction is challenging. The stuff they have is not always appropriate to the audiences they're working with. So for instance, somebody said, you might have a book from the 1990s with those 1990s fashions, and the kids in your school are going to be like, yeah, I'm going to carry that around. I don't think so. Or, you might have the touchy-feely kind of titles like Getting to Know Your Feelings, and that's not something that kids are going to want to carry around with them a whole lot. And somebody else noted that, we have lots of mental health pamphlets in the library, and they're basically just like wallpaper. Nobody takes them. They aren't active. They aren't providing information. Another sub-theme: high interest and fiction materials are used more than nonfiction. And some of this comes from our state student chosen and teacher chosen award books. We call them the Mark Twain and the Gateway Awards. And a lot of those tend to be focused on mental health issues or issues about stigma. And when you get a lot of people reading them, then you're not carrying around the one book that there's a dealing with suicide and depression. No one's pointing at you saying, oh, you're dealing with suicide and depression, eh? And then other resources, like we had one person realize that, so I got these American Girl books because they were popular, and one of them was A Girl's Guide to Worry. And we didn't think, oh yeah, students worry. So this is part of the value of fiction. A sub-theme: the school library itself is a resource sometimes because people feel safe there. I mean, not everyone feels safe there, but probably if you're in here like I'm in here, you had those moments in high school or in junior high or in elementary school where you decided that you would spend lunch in the school library instead of in the cafeteria. So teachers say, or librarians say, people come in, they tell me things that I'm not coming at them with expectations. They don't have to do their assignment, so I'm not asking them, how's that assignment coming along? So they tell her things. And another librarian admitted, they tell way more than we want to know. And so we are de facto a mental health resource. Okay, the second theme was challenges. And so the biggest challenge we found in the focus group is school librarians absolutely do not feel comfortable providing mental health support. And that is because in some ways we think about mental health support as only the worst cases. So it's somebody having a major episode, a dissociative episode. But what we don't realize is that mental health wellness is a part of mental health support. And certainly nobody we talked to in our focus groups referred to it that way. They were like, oh no, I don't do mental health support. And I'm like, well, do you provide story times about being a good citizen? Oh yeah, everybody does that. So the one thing we found is that they don't feel they have the expertise. And another thing that was really interesting is a couple of our respondents felt like if they were to tell, or if they were to provide the example that was used was suicide prevention, if they were to provide resources related to that, like 13 Reasons Why, and then the worst happened, that their administrators would come right back and blame them. And so that was kind of troubling because, you know, here we are trying to do right, raising awareness, but you are the messenger that gets killed when you bring bad news. Related to that, mental health stigma deters students' access to resources. You're not going to be the person who checks out the bulimia book because everyone's going to say, oh, you have bulimia now? And be like, oh, I was just checking out a book. I'm not admitting anything. So yeah, they said, you know, other kids, they notice, they point. And there's also the awkwardness of, okay, my grandma died. So I can totally, like, everyone understands my grandma died. Everyone understands my arm is broken. But they don't always understand opioid addiction. They don't understand depression. They don't understand some of the stronger mental health concerns that are actually just illnesses like any other. One suggestion that we did get is that maybe we could use ebooks and then no one can see what you're reading. And that was a great solution until we looked at school library budgets. Okay, so what do school librarians want? Well, they want more training. Nobody felt comfortable just going out and doing work based on what they currently know. So they wanted more professional development. They wanted to feel empowered by their administration and by their school counseling personnel. They wanted more resources and better resources. And honestly, when you look at school library collection budgets, you'll know exactly why. I mean, and they wanted more books, more ebooks, but they also wanted more human resources. They wanted people who could share the burden, because in many rural schools, it's one librarian who might be also teaching 3 or 4 classes in addition to being a librarian. So, you know, we had somebody say, I just don't know if I have enough or if I know enough to help a person when somebody calls me up and says, hey, we need help. And then, of course, they mentioned, oh, we need book lists. Well, book lists are easy. We could do that right now. There are tons of book lists out there, but we just need to make them available to the people who need them. Another sub-theme, we're all overworked. Rural school librarians are overworked, and they're like, you know, even our counselors are overworked. So we had a couple of people who said, I don't think I could do this well, and I would not feel comfortable doing it if I can't do it well. We noted there was a lot of low morale over layoffs. That this was pre-COVID, so I imagine there's still low morale, and it may be lower for different reasons. And that counselors have to manage all the standardized testing because that fits in with counselors' role, I guess. But the good news is we all see the opportunity for partnerships. So we don't want to do it alone, but we could partner with other people to do it. So librarian said, I'd like to know from the counselors, what are the biggest issues? And then I could target my resources. Or my administrators and my teachers kind of think it's all up to the counselors and they have no idea what the school library could be doing. So that brings us to our last theme from the focus groups. Pardon me. And that is examples to follow. And actually it was after we did this research, I started talking to Megan Harper of, I believe, Kent State. And she's like, so here's what I'm using because kids in my area, their parents are having a lot of opioid overdose. This was all pre-pandemic. We have different problems. Well, we have some of the same and some different problems now. There's a lot of the opioid epidemic is really impacting kids' feelings of security and safety. So here's some of the things that I took from somebody else's ethic of care, but I'm calling it Megan Harper's now, to adapt for school librarians. So some of this is like making up, like we do passive readers advisory, we do passive mental health literacy. So tough topics for kids, you typed up a sign and then you put all the books about tough topics, you cluster them there. Another librarian did book groups, and these were largely related to the Missouri Award winners, the Mark Twain books. So we have our Mark Twain book club, and we picked books about students with various kinds of issues or concerns, and then we were all able to talk about it without saying necessarily, without pointing a finger, so we could empathize with what this student was facing. Okay, and of course, the biggest problem that we have is that school-based mental health programs are focused on ameliorating existing problems, not on maintaining student mental health. This is a sad and big issue because we have lots of existing problems, but if we don't do something to alleviate those, we're not going to solve those problems. We're going to have more existing problems in the future. So a couple of our respondents said, okay, every year our school participates, they do a county mental health survey 3 times a year, all the teachers, all the grade levels, the data is looked at, and then the counselor meets with children in need. And another school district said we had specifically a suicide screening, and that is the only thing that they do. And this was kind of depressing because they could have been doing more. They could have been doing more to foment socio-emotional learnings, mental health skills, but rural districts don't have a lot of money, so you put the money where you feel the need is, or your administrators do. Okay, so we had some conclusions and implications. School librarians recognize that the school library can help, but they can't do it alone. So we have domain-specific knowledge. We can make book lists, we can do exchange forums, we can create sharing opportunities. One person said, my counselor uses the library as a space to meet with students, and she sometimes uses library resources. We want district personnel to be on board because the school librarian can't do it alone. The school librarian is already doing so darn much, as are the counselors, as are the teachers. Several of our focus group people participated in ethic of care practices, and it was kind of organically grown because no one told them, hey, this is ethic of care, you should use these practices. I was looking around and kids were, or somebody was posting tough topics for teens, and so I created it. I created a sign, and it seems to have helped. And no data has been collected on whether or not it does help either. Then we've got like a larger question about what actually is our role as school librarians. What should we be doing? And this is kind of my soapbox. I'm like, you know, it's easy. Every single day I go out into the world and I say to myself, there's so much that I should be doing right now. And then I do things and then I realize, like, wow, I could pay somebody to do this much better than I can do it. And it would be a better product in the end. And this, I think, is one of the downfalls of being in a helping profession, and especially being skilled people in a helping profession, is that we all think, I can do that. I'll just take it on. It'll be one more thing, but I can do it. And toward the end, I think the pandemic has helped us see that we cannot constantly be running at the edges of our productivity. We need to maintain ourselves. We need to take care of our own mental health resources and our own families, and we can't be draining our energy without replenishing. So that's kind of like the main message that I'm trying to emphasize now, is that we all need to take care of ourselves. And yes, school librarian, that means you. Okay, so that's basically the paper in a nutshell. That's like all the exciting stuff that we learned and that we did. But let me tell you the inside story. There's a lot left to do on this project. And what we thought we could do vastly exceeded what we actually could do. So we spent an entire year pretty much thinking we're going to put together instruments and things. That was a very unproductive use of our time. We didn't get anything done. I'm in another research group where we're following this exact same strategy and things are getting done. So I don't know what happened there, but we were not effective at project management. Not all of our group members were equally productive, and some of them were called away to other things. This is the joy of working with a fluid budget situation, is that sometimes you're like, hey, guess what? You're interim director now. Have fun. Oh, research? Oh, you could do that in your free time. So we actually promised IMLS a lot more than we have delivered to date. We do not have a counselor or administrator survey yet. We have not been able to do focus groups with administrators or counselors. And we are still analyzing survey results from school librarians. And when I say we, I mean me. Now, the other exciting, I don't know, my colleagues keep saying, this is an opportunity. And I'm like, I don't know. All of our librarian data was collected pre-pandemic. We have no idea what it's going to look like when we ask counselors and administrators. So what are the mental health concerns at your school now? I'm guessing they're not going to be the same. A couple of cool things though. We added Carrie Townsend. She's our doctoral student, and she actually has done an amazing job of reaching out and connecting us with rural school librarians who are surprisingly difficult to reach because they're in a rural setting. We had an MLIS student who had worked as a counselor in our juvenile justice system. And so I literally paid her money and said, could you interview a school counselor for me? And she did that. And we also learned that public librarians in rural areas are super interested in this topic because they connect with their school librarians. They all work to support the community. So what else have we done? We have done a review of materials held in rural public and school libraries. We've done the survey of school librarians about centered around the CASEL standards, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And my colleague Beth, so I'm like, oh yeah, they were all slackers, but my colleague Beth single-handedly created a course on children's and adolescent literature and media to support mental health and socio-emotional learning. I had created that course, it would have had a shorter title. So, rural library collections. These are highlights from future research. You won't actually get to see this because we haven't written it up yet. So, rural school libraries tend to have fewer titles than rural public libraries, and they tend to have no titles in ebook formats. But thank goodness they do have more Maslow Award winners. The way we did this is we started with a list of age-appropriate books related to mental health themes, fiction and nonfiction, and then we checked that list against rural school and public library catalogs to see what they held. Now, one of the major problems with this approach is that we found that some rural school libraries don't even have online catalogs. So that was a challenge. At some point in the past history of Missouri before I was here, our rural public libraries, our public libraries in general, tended to group up into countywide districts. And what we've found there is the countywide and larger countywide districts tend to have more titles and more electronic titles. Sometimes you had to request them, and that's a little awkward when you go to the desk and say, hey, miss, I'd like to get this book. So we did find that. Also in our rural neighborhoods, there do tend to be more, you know, the librarians and you know the students and you know their parents. So the situation, we're all like, oh, privacy rights, but the situation is a little more fluid. Our school librarian survey, it turns out, so we were using the 3-tiered model. Tier 1 is mental health support, making sure everyone's feeling good about socio-emotional learning. Tier 2 is, oh, I've got a problem, it's not serious. And Tier 3 is, I've got a serious problem. But what we found is school librarians are already doing a ton of work at the Tier 1 level, which is basically like, let's emphasize friendship. Let's emphasize making responsible decisions. Let's emphasize organization and planning. Let's emphasize relationship skills. We're already doing that work. We just didn't know it was mental health literacy. And we also found that of the school librarians who answered, yes, I'm comfortable dealing with Tier 2 and Tier 3, those tended to be people with more years of teaching experience, not more years of library experience, more years of teaching experience. So it could be just that they are more comfortable because they've grown older and wiser, or it could be that they have been to more professional development and had more experience. And then I sampled a couple of our homegrown solutions that were in the verbal, or the written open-ended questions on our survey, which of course Qualtrics managed to make very difficult to find. So it was like creating vision boards. We teach our students to create a vision board to kind of track where they want to be and how they're going to get there. We help implement school-wide behavior management. We've got the reward system. We teach things like, you know, even when you're in with very young children and they come into the library and the librarian says, okay, now crisscross applesauce, that is behavioral control. You're teaching them, okay, in this space, we sit with our legs crossed so that we can listen to the story attentively. Some school libraries, they used them as cool down spaces. They had fitness desks. They had mindfulness corners. They had calm to go kits. One school did yoga and meditation before school started. They had puzzles and coloring things out, and this was interesting. One respondent said, well, we have a library club, and we find that helps students learn how to interact with their peers because they don't always have the best social engagement skills. And this is kind of a way to build that in a low pressure environment. And of course, therapy dog visits, because everyone loves a therapy dog, and make and takes related to relaxation and stress relief. So that is more or less what we found. And it's a lot of hard-hitting stories about how we got here, why we got here, what we are hoping to find in the future. But for now, I don't have any more slides. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I welcome your questions if you have any.
Thank you, Denice. That was very interesting. I will just encourage people to unmute themselves and ask questions, but also feel free, please, to use the chat feature, and I will monitor that as well. So go for it.
So Heidi, we just jump in to ask questions.
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So Denice, this is great work, but I do have one question, which is you probably have done this. So have you looked into other places, other resources, other than the the libraries that people, the potential patrons, including children, parents, that have access and use. Like I assume they use online search, but what else? I mean, especially in rural areas.
That is actually a great future step for this. And the reason I call it a future step is because pretty much everything is a future step for this. One of the things that I would have liked to have done, and this was a thing that COVID prevented, is I would have liked to actually do visits to schools that said, hey, we're doing a good job. We've done a good job with mental health, and go in and see what is it that you're doing? What's happening at the library? What's happening in classrooms? What's happening in the cafeteria? And then we had a pandemic and none of that. I still have lots of travel money left in my budget. So that's what I'd like to do. The other thing that one of our respondents mentioned is that we've got some, I guess it was 4 years ago, our Missouri State Department of Mental Health worked with public libraries across the state to host the mental health first aid sessions. And we had at least one respondent say, I've never learned anything about mental health at my school, but I went to this mental health first aid at the public library and it was awesome. So I'd really love to know more about what our Department of Mental Health, our State Department of Mental Health, is doing to foment mental health in rural areas. But alas, that is a future project. Also, I know your background. I was there once.
Well, I've got a question. I'll jump in. One of the themes in your talk that piqued my interest was the theme about collaboration, professional collaboration, particularly between school librarians and probably teachers as well, and the counselors. And that's a question that I've explored a little bit in my own research, looking at collaboration between teachers in school settings and the librarians in schools, but also librarians in public libraries that often support schools. And I mean, the fundamental finding from that is that there isn't a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of interest and desire on the part of librarians in particular, and an understanding on the part of librarians that they have a lot to offer. School librarians are professionally trained teachers as well as being librarians, and they're trained to be supports in curriculum and curriculum delivery. And teachers don't necessarily know that. Teachers on that side are not trained to understand what it is that the school librarian can bring to the table professionally. So do you have anything else to say about that question of interprofessional collaboration?
That is actually a really unsurprising finding, because when we actually reviewed the literature, the school counseling literature and the LIS literature, no mention of collaboration. Certainly, I think the school counselors never, much like the teachers, never really thought about librarians as a potential partner, probably because, and this is me making a broad statement that you all can prove or disprove in your next research projects. I think we librarians know our domain expertise, but other people absolutely do not.
Yes.
And so we librarians are like, oh, yeah, we're connecting information, we're helping children shape minds and do creative things. And we go to teachers and counselors and they're like, well, you stamp books, don't you? So that is, I think, one of the challenges that we have to deal with. And that was also one of the reasons that we thought the collaboration with Dr. Melissa Morris, would be fruitful, is that she's hooked into the counselor networks. And one of the things she did, this was early on, many years ago, back when we were still meeting in person, she attended a couple of meetings where she said, hey, do you know that librarians can help you with these things? Because of course it was a revolutionary discovery to her that, Of course, the library, they have audiobooks. So that was one of the avenues that we felt we could make some, I don't want to say an indentation in, but we could make some, a mark in. A mark is the word I was looking for. The other thing that may help, or it may not, is that when we offered our children's and adolescent literature and media for mental health and social emotional wellness course, we offered it to the whole college. And so we are, like I think Buffalo, our iSchool is in a college of education, and we have a lot of problems with everybody assuming that all we do is education. But this comes in handy sometimes in that we can say, hey, educators, so we're doing this thing. Would you like to join in? And that helps us to a small degree train our future teachers. Now we produce most of the teachers in the state of Missouri, but we don't produce that many, and we only produce a certain number every year. So the other thing that we'd like to do more of, and we're going to recommend it in the future policy that we create, is a little bit more professional development training in the schools on mental health issues and creating partnerships and collaborations around mental health issues, so that honestly, I have no idea what a school counselor does. I'm like, I know our domain of knowledge so well, and I'm like, I don't know, they just talk to the student, right? So I think it would be useful for all of us, teachers, counselors, administrators, librarians, even janitors or maintenance people or lunch ladies who get told, lunch people who get told all sorts of things by students. Let us get together and let us share what we can offer and help each other know that when student has this question or this information need, send them to the library. When a student has this emotional trauma, send them to the counselor.
Well, I have a comment related to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a school of education, we could do a bit more, other departments willing, to just have in some course for the counselors a unit on what the library can do and how to collaborate with librarians. In some course for administrators, having the same unit in some course for teachers. I've tried that once, but it's sort of hard to do because all the curricula are already overloaded. But it's still something to argue for and to the benefits of. Then I also have a question: how does this mental health work interface with efforts on preventing bullying? And they're obviously, in one way, it's one and the same, but there's a lot of efforts in bullying and prevention. And it wasn't part of your findings, as it were, your talk. So I'm just interested to see what is the connection there?
Okay, well, that is a good question. I also agree that I think everybody in our college should have a little lesson on what do librarians actually do. But as you found out, the college is like, well, where will we fit this class? All the curriculum is so overloaded. And I'm like, I don't know. That's for smart people to figure out. Now, in terms of bullying and bullying prevention, we actually got a fair number of responses to the survey. So in the focus groups, that wasn't so much an issue because we tended to work more with, or we were talking more to rural school librarians there. And so if it wasn't a major house on fire issue, it got less attention. But when we did the survey, we did get a lot of people talking about, and a lot meaning like 10 respondents talking about their school's bullying prevention systems and a little bit about how they promote that or fit into that. and how they reward good behavior and cooperative learning, those kinds of things. But that's a really interesting avenue for looking at future research. Some of my colleagues upstairs, I'm at home now, but if I were in my office, they'd be directly upstairs above me, are doing a lot of anti-bullying research and looking at positive behavioral intervention strategies, which is basically teach your kids the right way to behave before you have to smack them down for behaving the wrong way. So there are a lot of opportunities to build on this research if I had like 3 more days in every week. But I welcome, if you want to help me build on this research, I welcome you. Join me in this mission.
I have a question actually that builds on on Dagerbert's last comment. Did you find any instances of the libraries being used as a punishment by the teachers? In other words, when a student is acting out, you send them to the library, which is, you know, in some of the rural areas, well, in many schools, tends to be the go-to for the teacher. I'm just wondering what you found out in your research about that.
Well, we did find a couple of instances of people saying, I hate it when the teacher uses us as a place to send bad students. And not in this research, but in other research that I've been doing, I have been working more or less hands-off with a couple of librarians who are like, so we get these students and the teacher considers them problem students. And I'm working with them. This is the librarian. I need to find a way to work with them so that their library time can at least be productive. And some of that is, you know, empowering them to make their own choices. Like, you're here in the library. What do you want to do? Here are some activities. That I unfortunately has been in more larger areas, not rural. The thing that we found with our rural librarians or rural school librarians is they were like, I can't have people in the library during all of these periods because I have to teach a class during 3rd period or 5th period, and they would be in the library unattended. So that's a different level of problem that doesn't really address the question at all.
Yeah, I just was wondering, especially with the mental health issues, goes sort of hand in hand with behavioral issues, and expecting librarians not only to be mental health counselors, but also in a way, I hate to say police, but in you know, they need to know how to look after these problem students who have been basically kicked out of the class, and as you say, helping those students not to see the library as a place for punishment, but as a place, as you say, for empowerment and learning, and helping the teachers to see that it should never be used as a place to just put students. But unfortunately, I know through some of my research as well that has happened.
Yeah, and that I think is the problem that sharing our domain expertise could help alleviate, maybe.
Mary Jo, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do wonder about your reaction to Denice's suggestion that maybe the curriculum for school librarians needs to be expanded to include something about supporting students' mental health. I mean, maybe, you know, it's my ignorance that it in fact is part of the curriculum, but do you have any comment about that? Yeah.
You know, we do include a class on teaching the exceptional learner, and it does cover some things, but not everything. So yeah, I think it would be a great idea. Actually, anyone who works with children, I think it would be beneficial to have some training in how to handle difficult situations. Or I know in my own experience as a librarian, I did have, I worked in a not rural, but semi-rural. And yeah, the kids would come down and tell you all sorts of things. And, you know, you're not entirely prepared to know how to react to certain things except to listen and, you know, let them know that they're heard. But yeah, I think it would be great and definitely something to look at.
It would be a great idea for a micro credential that school librarians could earn with 2 or 3 courses after they graduate, continuing education.
Yeah, I have a couple of students here I can see, and I definitely don't want to put them on the spot, but I don't know if they feel that they've had any, you know, kind of, if they're already teachers, have they had some professional development in this, or have they had experience learning about it? But if you have, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I wonder if even to broaden even further upon that or beyond that in terms of more holistic, just wide scale curriculum revision for school librarians, the more research that comes out, the more that we understand that they're doing, like this presentation provided. So they're tinkers, they're makers, they're supporting mental health situations. They are literacy experts and not just reading anymore, data literacy, information literacy. So I think, you know, the more that we find out, I mean, it's really about their roles and how central they are to all of the operations in a school. Like I wonder how much longer before someone looks, you know, tries to really shake things up and redesign the curriculum for school librarians.
I think, Dan, building on that, the idea that school librarians are so much more than resource people. I think a lot of times because people don't know what we do, it's more about the library and the resources that can be provided. And if there's a problem, oh, well, the librarian can give you resources, but the idea of the librarian being an active resource, you know, the librarian themselves being the active resource. I think that's something that could be, you know, really added onto in a present curriculum. Just the idea that stop thinking about the distance of, you know, giving a resource, think about yourself as an active resource.
Yeah, that actually echoes some of what I encourage the librarians at my institution to tell people is that I'm here to help you with your needs. Not, I'm here because I'm going to load things down on you and I'm going to give you more resources that you have to deal with. So I see that Rebecca Isbell has, what are some ways public libraries help with school libraries with mental health? And the largest way that we found is that they have additional resources and they do make some programming available, like the mental health first aid programming that they made available across the state. Normally, I think the mental health first aid training costs money. I don't know how much, but our state Department of Mental Health did some magic and got it for free for public libraries. And those are the ways that I've seen public libraries help school libraries with mental health, but there might be other ways that I have not seen yet. Oh, excellent. And Sunha, good luck. If you're doing the full grant, you must have already been approved, but it's for the 2-pager, so
Actually, yeah, Amy is a PI, and I'm a co-PI, and we are planning to submit the full IMLS grant. And our grant is about engagement and survival and the success of the librarians of color. And I'm very interested in your works, and because you showed a good example of the successful IMLS grants projects. So I'm just wondering whether you can share some conceptual framework or theories related to the interprofessional collaborations. Also, if you know some kind of instruments to measure interprofessional collaboration.
I wish I had that. Unfortunately, I could tell you a theory, but my theory now is don't ever pay until when you're writing the grant, don't say you're going to buy out their course before they deliver something. That is what I'm going to tell you. We had a very unfortunate issue with, of course, Dr. Mara's being repositioned in the college, and suddenly we're like, but we were counting on you. And she's like, I got other stuff to do. So
Yeah,
make sure you have maximum budget flexibility.
The one theory on interprofessional collaboration that I'm aware of comes from Patricia Montiel overall, but that's the only one that I'm really aware of. I think we need to wind this up. Are there any last quick questions?
Just want to thank Denice for inspiring us to think a little more broadly about what school librarians do. Very useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to echo Dagobert's comment there and just thank you for guiding us along some new ways of thinking. And we wish you well for your research. These are tough times to be a researcher. And, you know, I like to think that this too shall pass, but you know, you'll get back on it. So on behalf of all of us, let me say thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you for having me, and have a great rest of your, I guess it's evening for you now.
Just about. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Denice. This is really interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.